Thanks for joining us today on the Righteous Rock Show, Ken Tamplin. We really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to do this interview. What was the first band you were in?
Well, the first band I was in was quite a few years ago. I started my own group called Revival, and I think I had just turned 16. I had done actually one professional recording prior to that, which was kind of interesting, that I did on my own. But it was comprised of guys from, like, a couple youth pastors from Melodyland Christian Center way back in the day. In fact, we actually warmed up for bands that you might even remember that was, what was the name of that band that Doug Pinnick was in before King's X? It was called... let me think of it. It was a Christian band, and it was called Servant. Servant. Yeah, was the name of that band. But anyway, lots of, like, Jesse Dixon, and so that was quite a number of years ago. And then from there, I went on into another band called the Image Band, which was actually with Mike Stan. You might remember him as I knew him as Mike Annis, which is his real name, but Mike Stan in what is what's the name of the band that he did? It's a kind of a punk band. Gosh, my brain's failing me right this second. But anyway, so he went on to do that. Mike Stan, look his name up, because he's got a pretty good sized punk band. And then from there, I went to my first real kind of professional band, which was Joshua. I was in that band for 4 years, and then after Joshua was Shout, and Shout was Magdalene, and then a bunch of solo records after that.
When did you start playing guitar?
I actually picked up my guitar when I was about 6 years old. So I've been playing guitar since I was 6 years old, and singing since I was about 9. I didn't really take the voice that seriously for as far as being like a lead singer, because all I really cared about was my guitar solos. So it wasn't until I was about like 19 when I joined Joshua that I really started to take my voice seriously.
Did you think of the band name?
Well, actually, no. The Revival was my idea, because I was by myself. I was a 15-year-old kid. But actually, Shout was my wife's idea. She was the one that originally came up with that name. It was a cool name, and we were mulling over all kinds of different names, and we liked it. Joshua was obviously his name, Joshua Parahias, or Pariah. And then the Magdalene project was actually Lanny Cordola's idea. That was his name that he liked, because he thought it was an interesting example of God's grace to the world of, here's a woman that was a prostitute that God forgave, and how interesting he thought it would be to name a rock band like that. So I, those are that's sort of the evolution of the names of those bands.
When and how did you meet Chuck King?
Well, that's a really interesting story, and I think it deserves something, in my opinion, of maybe the most significance. When I left Joshua, and I was pretty distraught, and I'd been in the band for 4 years, and crazy hard work, but I just felt God told me it's time to leave. It was one of those weird things, and I had come off of a tour. I was dead broke, and I was hawking a wireless guitar system in a free classified ad newspaper called The Recycler, and one of the guys that called was a guy named Chuck, who said he didn't even know why he was calling. He didn't really need it. In fact, he'd never bought anything in The Recycler before he'd made the call, but he said he just felt like he was supposed to call, and I didn't know he was a Christian or anything. And so anyway, so he called, and we met up, and he said, hey, if there's any, you ever want to buy this back, I'll sell it to you for what you sold it to me for. We started talking. He was in a band called Idle Cure at the time, and he wasn't that stoked with the band, and for whatever reasons, he's still real good friends with all the guys. It wasn't no animosity with the people. It was just maybe musical and some other things. So anyway, from that, we just became friends, and we decided to start a band together, and the rest is history. So how did I come to know the Lord? Well, no, I certainly wasn't always a Christian, though I was brought up in a Christian home. Actually, the reality of it is that I picked up my first joint of marijuana when I was 6 years old, and I did my first line of cocaine when I was 9, because my older brother was actually a drug dealer, so I had access to drugs pretty readily. In fact, I OD'd clinically off the drug Angel Dust 3 separate times, 2 that were, actual clinical hospitalization kind of things. So, at any rate, but as fate would have it, I got involved in drugs. I started dealing drugs. In fact, the only reason I went to my first couple years in high school was to sell drugs, not to go to school for school. And one thing led to another. Finally, I really felt impressed that that the Lord was going to take my life. I mean, if I didn't stop, I was definitely not not going down a good path. And one time my mom invited me to come to a Sunday morning service down at Melodyland Christian Center, and the pastor started reading my life like a book and announcing it from the podium. And I had thought my mom had during the week maybe called the pastor and told him about my life story, until the pastor started talking about only things that I knew about, which I knew she couldn't have called and talked about because she didn't know. And he asked me to come forward, and so I did. I went forward, and I had the church pray for me, and from that day on, it was amazing because I had a very difficult time even taking any kind of drugs without panicking and feeling totally freaked out in a real supernatural kind of way. So with that said, too, my dad left home before I turned 13 years old. And at that time, prior to him leaving, running off with his secretary, I had accidentally made a rocket in my backyard out of an empty CO2 shell with match heads and match powder. You know how you can crush match powder or match heads into a CO2 shell? You light it and it shoots off like a rocket. Except mine actually turned into a pipe bomb. And the tip blew off and shot me in the stomach and ripped up my spleen and part of my colon and whatnot. And so I was actually put in a room to die. And so they gave my mom less than 1% chance of survival, which was pretty grim. And she began to call prayer chains and prayed for me, vigorously. And I also caught peritonitis and staph infection at that time, which made it even worse, because once that's in your blood and it reaches a point of no return, there's no way for them to be able to bring you back. And so after about 48 hours of an intensive care, the staph infection had receded and the peritonitis had receded to not normal levels but manageable levels. And I was a medical miracle thanks to the prayers of my mother. So anyway, so from then, when my dad left home, it was a very difficult time because obviously, there was the money stopped, and we wound up going from hotel to hotel. In fact, we lived in hotels for a solid year, weekly moving, because we didn't have the money and whatnot, and he was not paying child support and so forth. So we were just scraping to get by. Finally, we sort of met our end. I mean, after about a year of this, we were stuck in some hotel in the middle of La Habra, California, and we ran out of money, dude. And we ran out of food, and we ran out of gas, and we ran out of a way to live. So shamefully and sadly, my mom, not knowing what to do, suggested that the whole, my younger brother and myself and her commit suicide because there was nothing left. There was no hope. My sister was in jail. My older brother was in jail for dealing drugs. And in fact, no, I apologize. My sister had run away from home at that point. She wasn't in jail. Just my older brother was in jail. But anyway, and at that point in time, when she'd made the suggestion, we had an old black and white TV in this cockroach-infested, pesticide-smelling, dingy hotel room in La Habra. In fact, they call it Guadalajara now. It's kind of funny. But anyway, and so she, had made this proclamation to us saying, I don't know, we had a little bit of peanut butter left in a jar and a couple pieces of white bread. We should probably just eat it and take these pills, and that would be that. And she no sooner said that when there was a show called The 700 Club that was on TV that was playing in the background, and there was a guy named Ben Kinchlow that came on and said, there's a family out there right now, and you're thinking of committing suicide, and you're in Whittier, California. And it was interesting because he had said Whittier, California. But ironically, the place we were in was on the cusp, on the border, where one side of the motel was in La Habra and the other side was in Whittier, and we just happened to be on the side that was on the Whittier side, which was really strange. I'll never forget the name of the place. It was called the Oasis Motel. And anyway, he said, don't do it. Call the number on your screen. So we called the number on the screen, and a pastor of a local church came over and gave us a check for $25 to have gas in our car, and then a food voucher for $25, and then little by little, some things started. Salvation Army helped out, and some other things helped out, and I wound up getting a job at a very young age and started, selling carpet door to door at night, and all kinds of different odd jobs to sort of make ends meet, and God little by little dug us out of that pit and brought us through some amazing times. He's so faithful if you just trust him, and it may not be easy, but in the end, it's worth it. It's glorious. It makes you appreciate things, and in the end, he can show you that it was his doing and not yours, to show his power and his might and his grace and kindness. So anyway, that's really a very condensed Reader's Digest version, but hopefully that'll suffice for your question.